and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where I delve into the day's big stories for an all-you-can-eat news briefing. Keeping me company today is Scarlett Maguire, journalist, political advisor and author, and here's what we'll be discussing. Boris goes for the nuclear option, but it all feels a bit like Groundhog Day after decades of government flip-flopping. Are we now ready to commit? And we're all still buying fuel from Russia, with little choice if we want to keep the lights on. Zelensky has called for a Russian oil boycott, saying anything less is permission for Moscow to attack. But is it even on the cards? She lives in 11 Downing Street, but has allegedly dodged paying tax by claiming to live abroad, as her husband goes about running the UK Treasury. Not a good look for Rishi and his wife in the latest scandal to embroil the Tories. That's what we're talking about for the next hour, but what do you need to get off your chest? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister says the government's energy strategy is about making sure the UK never again is blackmailed by people like Vladimir Putin. It's also about tackling mistakes of the past. The new strategy published today aims to boost homegrown nuclear, wind, solar and hydrogen power to reduce the UK's dependence on overseas oil and gas and to try and keep energy prices stable. Well, under the new plans, the government hopes to deliver up to 8 nuclear reactors by 2030.
Have energy security here in the UK. This is the home of nuclear energy. We first split the atom in the UK. We had the first civilian nuclear power plant. We're bringing nuclear home with one nuclear plant and one nuclear reactor every year for 8 years rather than one a decade.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the measures fail to address the issues people are facing right now.
This won't help those who only last week saw their energy bills go up by hundreds of pounds. What they want from the government is a response that meets that challenge. This list, this cobbled together list of things that could and should have been done over the last 10 to 12 years isn't enough. And, you know, it leaves, because of political squabbling, it leaves out of account really important initiatives like keeping homes warm, insulating homes, which I've seen for myself, can make a huge difference and reduce bills by up to £400. That's the real action we were looking for today.
Boris Johnson has described the attacks in Ukraine as systematic slaughter of innocent people. Earlier today, the Foreign Secretary announced the UK is banning all imports of Russian energy and is stepping up its supply of weapons to Ukraine. Liz Truss revealed the new measures at a NATO gathering of foreign ministers in Brussels this morning. Now, Ukraine's foreign minister says the country needs more weapons from its NATO allies so it can better repel Russian forces. Well, what of those military forces? According to British military intelligence, the Russian forces are focusing now on the Donbas region in Ukraine, with artillery and airstrikes continuing. British military intelligence also adds that Russian forces are likely to continue facing issues of morale and shortages of both supplies and personnel. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says the country hopes to evacuate trapped civilians through 10 humanitarian corridors today. President Zelensky told the Greek Parliament there's still 100,000 people left in Mariupol.
We have never seen a city being reduced to ashes, completely flattened. The city being completely under the siege. Its residents are killed by hunger and thirst. There are still about 100,000 people still left in the city, but there is virtually no building left undamaged.
Well, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has welcomed the President of Poland to Downing Street. Mr Johnson said the UK and Poland were working together to alleviate the suffering in Ukraine, adding that the crisis has brought the two countries closer. Well, President Duda said the two leaders will discuss what can be done on the international stage so that sanctions are stepped up to try to contain Russian aggression. Both hailed the historic alliance between the two countries.
For the immediate future, the UK and Poland will work together to try to alleviate the suffering in Ukraine in any way that we can. I think we're now sending another £30 million to support Poland. And as I speak and as we stand here, there are NHS ambulances being driven by Polish drivers to help give vital medical relief and support to the suffering people of Ukraine.
A security guard accused of spying for Russia at the British Embassy in Berlin has pleaded not guilty. David Smith appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court charged with 9 offences under the Official Secrets Act. He's been remanded in custody. The British national was extradited to the UK from Germany. A search and rescue mission has resumed to try to look for a British man and his teenage son who went missing on a diving trip in Malaysia yesterday. It's 46-year-old Adrian Chesters and his 14-year-old Dutch son Nathan. They were reported missing with 2 others whilst diving near the coastal town of Mersing. A 35 Norwegian woman has been rescued and taken to hospital. She told authorities she lost sight of the other divers after the group drifted far from their boat because of strong underwater currents. A French national is also still unaccounted for. You're up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Knock, knock. Who's there? The 1980s. They want their energy policy back. To say that the UK's approach to nuclear has been higgledy-piggledy is an understatement. From Thatcher extolling it, to Labour being positively schizophrenic on the matter, to Cameron asking China to build Hinkley Point, a gung-ho security faux pas dropped when COVID made us question whether we'd really want Beijing involved in such sensitive technology on our shores. Here we are, back to square one, with Boris Johnson telling us today the future is once again nuclear.
Instead of a new reactor every decade, we'll have a new reactor every year. For years, governments have dodged the big decisions on energy, but not this one. We've got the ambition, we've got the plan, and we're going to bring clean, affordable, secure power to the people for generations to come.
Sounded like he was in a nightclub, didn't it? Well, history tells us new sites often take the best part of a decade to construct, and under a government with a track record of bumbling on targets for big-ticket projects, you have to wonder whether the entire plan will be dropped before the first one even goes online. Nuclear may be trendy today as the West's naive energy policy has been hideously exposed by Putin, but it will doubtless be demonised again tomorrow. No government can bind its successor, seemingly even when from the same party. And while nuclear, frankly, still is the best bet, do you really trust those in power to string a long-term strategy together? We were pioneers in splitting the atom. Perhaps now we can master time travel too. Well, let's look at the detail. The government's energy strategy says up to 8 new nuclear plants could be built by 2030, upping the pace from 1 a decade to 1 a year. Plans are being advanced to approve 2 new reactors at Sizewell in Suffolk during this Parliament. Wilver in Anglesey is also named as a possible site for either a large-scale plant, smaller modular reactors, or possibly both, again during the next Parliament. Joining me now on the show is Conservative MP for Ynys-Môn, or Anglesey to us English speakers, Virginia Crosby. Now, Wilver is your constituency. I've never known anything like it. Looking at the history of the plans and proposals for Wilver, they seem to change every 5 minutes. Can you trust what the Prime Minister's saying today?
Well, thank you, Alex. I mean, today is a huge moment for Ynys-Môn, my constituency here in North Wales. And I'm absolutely delighted with the UK government's British energy security strategy in terms of our renewable, but also giving us energy security. And quite rightly, you mentioned that Wilver has had some history. So I'm delighted to see that we are going to have the Great British Nuclear. This is a government body that will encourage investment, private investment in the sector. We've also got the future nuclear delivery fund, and we've also got the commitment from the UK government to increase additional investment in this sector.
I mean, 1 a year is ambitious, though, isn't it? How on earth could the government really make that happen?
Well, we've got all but one of our nuclear reactors are going off within the next decade, and we need to be investing now. We need to be investing now so that we can get 25% of our energy from nuclear by 2050. You mentioned the Labour Party. In their 1997 manifesto, they said that they could see no economic case for investing in new nuclear. So we really are trying to catch up. So this is a bold, ambitious strategy, and I'm absolutely delighted to be part of it.
I mean, I think you're fair enough pointing out that Labour weren't exactly solid on nuclear in the 90s, but the Conservatives have now been at the helm of the ship for quite a while, and it's taken for Putin to invade Ukraine and energy prices to almost quadruple for people, for the government to pull their finger out today. At what point are they going to change their mind again?
Well, clearly they are actually doing something about it, as demonstrated by the energy security strategy today, as demonstrated by the future nuclear enabling fund, and also by the nuclear financing bill that went through, that saw royal assent over the last couple of days.
Now, one thing that was proposed relating specifically to Wilver was the idea of building small modular reactors there. That's a technology that certainly excites me because it can be popped up a lot quicker, and we could potentially have great British names like Rolls-Royce helping us to do it. What would be your preference? A big, new, shiny nuclear reactor, or something a little bit more smaller but more innovative?
Well, the goal is to have eight new nuclear sites within this decade. On Ynys-Môn, I've certainly got a room for 2 large reactors and 3 or 4 SMRs as well. But really, the situation is so acute in terms of us delivering our net zero challenges and in terms of us delivering our security of energy supply that really it is all focused on different types of reactors. And I certainly won't count my chickens before they're hatched. And we've still got an awful long way to go. But I think it's clear here the UK government has got a very ambitious strategy, and it's good to see the Prime Minister committed to nuclear.
It's an ambitious strategy, but it could be prone to NIMBYism, surely. And I know in the past that Wilver has been beset by local residents potentially being against anything being developed there, and of course green activists. Do you think your constituents are behind these proposals?
Well, the key thing with any of these big, large infrastructure projects is getting that support of the community. And that's why we have DCOs, development consent orders. And this is an opportunity for the community to actually get involved and have a voice. Now, here on Anglesey, the community is very used to nuclear. We've had Wilver. And most importantly, they're used to the high, good quality jobs that nuclear actually entails. And at the moment, what we're doing is actually importing some of our nuclear from the likes of France. We get 16% of our energy from nuclear. France gets 80%, and they themselves have announced another 6 nuclear power stations. They're going from 56 to another 6. So I think it's really important that we actually get some of those high-skilled quality jobs coming into the UK as part of our whole levelling up agenda.
Yeah, Virginia, I hope so too. I think it'd be a wonderful boost for Anglesey. Virginia Crosby, MP for Anglesey there on Wilver potentially being in the government's crosshairs for the new nuclear strategy. Well, joining me on the show now is the Public Affairs Manager of the World Nuclear Association, John Lindberg. John, this must be music to your ears, but why on earth has it taken so long?
Alex, that is an excellent question. Unfortunately, we have seen successive British governments and governments around the world dithering on these crucial decisions. And for decades, we have been arguing that nuclear is the best way to ensure that you have that energy independence and security that most of us are so desperate to have. So whilst we're obviously very happy about the British government's announcements today, again, this is decisions that should have been taken a long time ago.
Oh, indeed. If only we had a time machine and maybe Putin wouldn't be in Ukraine. Now, what I want to ask is how long do these things take to build? If you're talking about a huge new nuclear site, because Boris Johnson, in the clip I played earlier, is almost saying that we could build one a year. That seems like fantasy land to me.
So we do see on average, it takes about 6 years to build a large-scale reactor. We've seen, for instance, with Hinkley Point C, that's taking a bit longer, but that's also down to the fact that the UK hasn't built nuclear for decades. Building up the infrastructure, building up the supply chains and the skills takes time. So we should expect that reactors should take about 5 to 6 years to build in the UK. And indeed, we do see these sort of learning effects already at Hinkley Point C with some of the major infrastructure engineering work on the second reactor taking 30% less time. So the key here is that you continue to build and you may have this ironclad commitment that once you start building, you continue to build a nuclear fleet. And that way you get the learning effects, which drives down cost, makes sure you can build faster. And this is something we've seen in Sweden, we've seen this in France, we've seen this in South Korea.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually brought up the fact that, you know, we need to train a workforce to build these things and we need the resources to do it, because the next question I was going to ask you is who's going to be building these? Because one of the reasons that Hinkley was beset by delays was because Cameron's idea of getting the Chinese to build a third of it suddenly became deeply unpopular during COVID for reasons of national security. So who is going to build these new nuclear power stations, do you think?
So there is already huge investments in the UK towards this sort of workforce that is required to build it. And I think if we now get this ironclad commitment from the UK government, and we also start seeing not just political rhetoric, but also hard decisions being made. So, for instance, giving Sizewell C the go-ahead and another site, you will see that the nuclear industry stands there ready to invest into skills and into the sort of the workforce that's required. So most of the expertise will exist already in the UK, and depending on which technology is being used for these reactors, we'll see probably a small contingent of French engineers, American engineers, or South Korean engineers. But this could be a predominantly British workforce. There's no doubt about that.
Let's hope so. John Lindberg, who's the Public Affairs Manager at the World Nuclear Association, thank you so much for coming on the programme. Well, joining me throughout the show is former Labour media advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, I mean, I don't know what to even say about this policy. It would have been great a decade ago. I still think it's great now. But like I said, in 10 years' time, when we finally get around to building the first one of these, is the government going to have changed their minds again?
Well, I mean, there's that. There's that these take. I mean, what we know about nuclear, apart from the fact that it's not always safe, right? We have not dealt with this little problem called nuclear waste. But apart from that, it always goes over budget and it always goes over time. And actually, on Anglesey and everywhere else, there will be people saying, "Yeah, nuclear is great, but not in my backyard, thank you." So we're going to have all of that. And so you listen to the politicians. Yeah, I mean, I listen to the guy from nuclear. I mean, they don't know anything. Who's going to pay for it, right? Who is going to pay for it when actually what we need to do is to have a proper energy policy, and it could actually begin with insulating our homes so that we use less energy. We've got renewables up. You can put renewables up really fast. And instead, we're sort of saying, well, that's all right, but we're having a row in the Tory party about onshore wind, so we don't really like that. Offshore wind, we're sort of doing, and this isn't an energy policy. I mean, this isn't because we need something now. I mean, you know, we've spent 6 months knowing that we were going to have an energy crisis. Nothing happened until the bills went up. And then we have this ridiculous thing.
You do wonder, don't you, if it is a bit of a soundbite because of war in Ukraine. And it does seem to me, like you said, a huge omission from the energy policy. Simple things like making sure that households around the country aren't wasting energy, government helping with schemes for people to insulate their homes.
When the Conservatives came in, the first thing they did was they stopped. You used to have new homes had to be properly insulated. They dropped that as red tape, right? I mean, you know, we can't save energy, you and me, if our homes are leaking. If we move into a new house and it's properly insulated, immediately our bills go down.
And, I mean, with this strategy today, nuclear is clearly the top line, but they have been talking about renewables. But they've also sort of put an ellipsis when it comes to UK fossil fuels, at least for the interim period as we transition to a more sustainable energy grid. Do you think that's the right approach?
Well, it's not going to bring energy prices down. I mean, the pretense is that it will. And actually, if they concentrate on the things that we want forever, which is the renewables, I mean, you know, things like solar power. I mean, I should have solar panels on my roof. It is really difficult to find them. You know, we could all new houses should be built with solar panels. All new public buildings should be built with solar panels. We could have been doing this for years. I mean, we don't have to be in the energy crisis we are in at the moment.
No, I agree. It's been an utterly mad policy for the past, I don't know, however many countless decades. Lack of long-term thinking. Scarlett, thank you so much. I want to know your views on this as well. Have we wasted time dithering over nuclear power? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. You are, of course, with GB News on TV and radio after the break. How can the EU justify spending 35 times as much on Russian energy as on support for Ukraine? It's terrible, isn't it? First, it's time for a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A windy day for all of us, those winds bringing wintry showers to many parts, but there will be some brighter spells, especially for southern counties. This low pressure is moving away, but around that low we've got tightly packed isobars and a strong wind blowing from the north to northwest. That's bringing cold air in, hence the wintry showers, a mixture of rain, sleet, hail and snow in places. And the winds will be gusting 40 to 50 miles an hour, and those strongest winds will be transferring east across the country, so turning up across east and southeast England a bit later on. The far south stays mostly dry with some sunshine, 12 or 13 Celsius here. Otherwise, further north, it's 8 or 9 degrees, and the lively showers falling as a mixture of rain, sleet, hail and snow over hills. Many of the showers disappear through the night. The winds fall a bit lighter. We'll see clear spells, but further showers into Scotland and Northern Ireland, again falling and settling as snow over the hills. It's going to be a frosty night with temperatures dipping below zero in the countryside. In the far south, however, it stays frost-free. Cloud turns up here. A few spots of rain into the far south and southwest. Mainly the heavier rain stays out in the Channel and affects the Channel Islands, but coastal parts will see a damp start. That rain eventually pulls away. And then for many, it's another sunny spells and showers sort of day. Again, a mixture of hails and sleet at lower levels, snow over hills, and it will stay cold with temperatures of 12 Celsius in the south, 7 or 8 further north. The brisk wind continues, but not quite as blustery as Thursday. Into Friday night, once again, the winds fall a bit lighter. Clear spells will allow a frost to form, and so it's a chilly start to the weekend. But Saturday, for many, looks dry and bright. With lighter winds and more sunshine, it will be a more pleasant day.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
It's not often the EU slags itself off, believe me. I was speechless when Brussels Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell fessed up to the European Parliament that EU countries had given a grotesque 35 billion euros to Russia for fuel since they invaded Ukraine, compared to just 1 billion to Kiev to defend itself. Zelensky is bang on pointing out that the almost billion a day given to Moscow is at the cost of Ukrainian lives. Well, EU chiefs are finally set to announce a ban on Russian coal, but not until at least August, under the insistence of, oh yeah, you guessed it, Germany. But before Brussels chiefs sleep well at night, the EU isn't even touching Russian oil and gas, which represent far bigger imports funding Putin's war machine. But before Brexiteers like me get sanctimonious, we're worse. The UK will still be buying coal from Putin until the end of the year. Well, let's talk to retired Rear Admiral from the US Navy and nuclear power specialist Mike Hewitt about this now. Mike, fantastic to have you on the programme. You're a man of all trades today. We can talk to you on a lot of it. But let's focus in on the EU's energy security and the amount they're still paying to Russia in comparison to what they're giving to Ukraine. Is there any way, do you think, that they can wean themselves off the black stuff from Russia and actually, you know, potentially cripple the Russian economy to the extent that the conflict stops?
Well, I think, Alex, what this indicates is we become energy dependent upon Russia and China and sources of fossil fuel. And that's exactly what Putin's strategy is to have us dependent upon their energy, which really puts us at a disadvantage in situations like this. I simply don't think we can unwind ourselves from Russian energy as a way to end the conflict. I think what the EU should really focus on is winning the war in Ukraine. What is that defined as? Helping Zelensky do that, and then we worry about how we rebuild Ukraine, particularly if we're thinking about using the profits from Russian oil and gas to do so.
Now, I think we're expecting to catch up with Jens Stoltenberg of NATO again, possibly even at the end of this programme. How do you think NATO's looking through the prism of all of this? Because it seems to me that every step NATO tries to take is undermined by one of its members at some point.
Right. I mean, NATO really have been disappointed from the get-go at how NATO has addressed this issue. I mean, first off, they should have been talking about Ukrainian victory and then resourcing that victory and not being so concerned about miscalculation on the part of Putin. The NATO miscalculation was thinking that sanctions or the threat of sanctions and telling Putin what we wouldn't do would stop him from invading Ukraine. So I think from a NATO perspective, and recognizing again that energy is core to this conversation, NATO needs to talk about what's a Ukrainian victory. They also need to really put their foot down on war crimes and start to go after these generals and these politicians and all the way down to the working level and even go after the oligarchs and say, look, you are the guys resourcing the Russian war. It's not us buying their energy per se. And then finally, I think we need to start to talk about what does a Ukraine look like after victory, and particularly some of the issues with WMD and the things we've seen Putin threaten to do. If we don't have a more forceful stance on that issue, I'm not sure where this ends.
Now, Mike, I know you are a huge proponent of nuclear power, so let's talk about that as well, as it's the big top story today. Nice headlines, but the devil, of course, is in the detail. With this ambitious target of potentially trying to build a nuclear site every year, it seems a bit crazy to me that I don't think that can be achieved. But is there a risk of who we let into these projects? How should this be rolled out, do you think?
Well, I really appreciate how the Prime Minister has put this forward as a bold plan, as a plan that really should have been executed years ago, and recognizing that many of the faults of the past with nuclear power were really based on some of the government approaches to it. And as you've mentioned earlier, it's the risk of the government changing its mind on nuclear power that causes the problems that we have. But I think most of all, and the Prime Minister talked about bringing home nuclear, I would change that to say building at home nuclear. And when I think about Rolls-Royce and the small modular reactor and the brand name that Rolls-Royce represents, I believe we can actually achieve the Prime Minister's goals if we focus on an indigenous workforce and an indigenous company such as Rolls-Royce. And I say that because it will allow us to attract the kind of private capital, investment capital that see nuclear power as a good, clean investment and also a good investment for the returns. And so we're very excited about the Prime Minister's statement on nuclear.
Yeah, Mike, it's fantastic having you on the show. We love having you on, and good luck. I hope someone's listening to you because you're bang on. Well, Scarlett, let's go back to this boycott that Zelensky's calling for on Russian oil. We kind of know it's not feasible with an energy crisis and with the contracts already in place. Europe would basically grind to a halt, wouldn't it? Where does that leave us morally?
We're in trouble, aren't we? And this has been building up for years, hasn't it? The whole Russian pipeline, Germany knew was going to put them in hock to Moscow. It was always a problem, and it was always why they had to move. But we can't say to Germany, oh, well, we're British and we're okay, and you've got to cut it off and your people have got to have no heating and no lighting. We just can't do that. And on the other hand, if I was Zelensky, I would be saying exactly that. You won't give us the money, but you'll give it to Moscow. It's realpolitik, isn't it? It's what's been going on for years. And it's that normal thing about politics is nobody wants to deal with the very difficult question, which is, why are we so dependent on everybody else for energy?
Yeah, indeed. It takes a crisis, doesn't it, often to point out the gaping holes in government policy.
Yeah.
Scarlett, thank you so much. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, the Chancellor's accused of hypocrisy over his wife's tax status. The wonderful Tom Harwood will be here with political reaction. But now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It is 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date. The Prime Minister has welcomed the President of Poland to Downing Street. President Duda said the two leaders will discuss what can be done on the international stage to help Ukraine. Boris Johnson said that the Ukraine crisis had brought the two countries closer.
For the immediate future, the UK and Poland will work together to try to alleviate the suffering in Ukraine in any way that we can. I think we're now sending another £30 million to support Poland, and as I speak and as we stand here, there are NHS ambulances being driven by Polish drivers to help give vital medical relief and support to the suffering people of Ukraine.
Well, Boris Johnson says the government's energy strategy is about making sure the UK is never again blackmailed by people like Vladimir Putin. The new strategy published today aims to boost homegrown nuclear, wind, solar and hydrogen power to reduce the UK's dependence on overseas oil and gas and to try and keep energy prices stable. Well, the UK is banning all imports of Russian energy and stepping up its supply of weapons to Ukraine. Liz Truss revealed the new measures at a NATO gathering of foreign ministers in Brussels this morning. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused the Chancellor of breathtaking hypocrisy because of his wife's non-domiciled tax status. It follows reports by The Independent that she may have saved millions by not paying UK tax on foreign income. More than 750,000 people in the UK have reported having long COVID for more than a year. The new data also shows long COVID symptoms are estimated to be affecting the day-to-day activities of over 1 million people. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now, let's head back to Alex shortly after the break.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
The man accused of murdering the Southend West MP Sir David Amess has told a court today that he has no regrets over the death, and he admitted to having previously wanting to target Michael Gove. Giving evidence from the witness stand, Ali Harbi Ali told jurors at the Old Bailey he decided to kill Sir David because of his voting record on airstrikes against Syria. Well, let's cross live to the Old Bailey and speak to GB News Home and Security Editor Mark Wright. Mark, what else has been heard in court?
Well, we are now approaching the end stages of this murder trial, and a dramatic moment today, as for 80 minutes we heard from the man accused of murdering Sir David Amess on the 15th of October last year inside that regular constituency surgery that was being held in a Baptist church in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex. Sir David stabbed more than 20 times by Ali Harbi Ali, because Ali Harbi Ali in the witness box admitted to killing Sir David Amess. He denies murder, though. He said that he had no remorse for stabbing the MP to death, and that the reason he did it was because, as you mentioned in the introduction there, that voting record on Syria in 2014 and 2015. And of course, he had also considered attacking other MPs who had voted for the bombing of Syria. In his evidence to both defence and then prosecution, he said, "I decided to do it because I felt that if I could kill someone who made decisions to kill Muslims, it could prevent further harm to those Muslims." He, Sir David, voted previously in Parliament, not just him. "I decided if I couldn't make hijrah, if I couldn't travel to Syria effectively, I couldn't help Muslims in Syria, I would do something here." In his evidence, he said that he wanted to go to Syria to fight alongside the Islamic State, but was unable to do that and decided to turn his attention to the UK instead. And this plot was some 5 years in the planning according to the prosecution. We'd heard previously that Ali Harbi Ali had scoped out a number of other politicians, including the Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, another colleague, a Cabinet Minister, Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, and the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. All were within his sights at one time, but he settled on Sir David Amess. Sir David, who of course was an easy target, always available to his constituents. So as I say, this murder trial now in the end stages. It has adjourned for tomorrow, but we'll be back here on Monday for the closing speeches and then the judge's final remarks as well.
Mark, thank you so much for the update. Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor. Now, the Labour Smears Unit must be pretty smug today. From Golden Boy and almost anointed successor to Boris, Rishi Sunak's reputation now lies in tatters, not only because of those tax hikes, but because it's been revealed his wife has claimed non-dom status to avoid paying millions of pounds of tax to the UK. Well, that's pretty dodgy when your husband is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, overseeing the biggest cost of living crisis in half a century. I mean, she even lives at the taxpayer's expense at number 11 Downing Street, for crying out loud. You couldn't make it up. It's the latest scandal to paint a picture of an elite in power, doused in privilege and with zero concept of what life is like now for millions plunged into actual poverty, and plays perfectly into the trope of the Tories being hideously out of touch. Well, let's go first to Tom Harwood for the latest on this. I mean, Tom, What could you say about this?
No, you're right. You're right. To many, there will be no words. But what's really interesting about this story is it's not the first time it's bubbled up in the press. Over a month ago, this story appeared in Private Eye, the magazine, without anyone paying much notice at all. It's only now that those tax hikes have come into effect that it's bubbled up again and now hit the mainstream and become a talking point because of the juxtaposition. And it's not the first story this week that we've seen. Clearly there is a Get Rishi operation now at play because, of course, earlier this week we saw that he was donating money to his former school, a boarding school. Over £100,000 he has donated. Now, Rishi Sunak says that this is to fund places for disadvantaged children, but still, it's not a good look. And similarly, there's the argument that his wife, an Indian national, on her business dealings abroad, is paying tax abroad for those business dealings. For business dealings in the UK, non-doms still pay tax in the UK. But it's been a controversial practice. Of course, it was an issue at the 2015 general election, and the Conservative Party came under hot water over non-dom status as well. I think we do need to take the context of the issue here, though, which is that non-dom status has existed since the 1700s. And there have been many governments of many different flavours since that time. Whig, Liberal, Conservative, Tory, Labour, none of them have got rid of the status because, of course, there is the issue of attracting global individuals, high net worth individuals to the UK. Should they be paying tax on every single thing they do everywhere in the world in this country? Or should they be paying tax on business in India, business in the UK, business in the United States of America, in the United States of America? There's an argument to be had there, but certainly the look of this, and it is not the first story, of course, about the Chancellor this week, it seems that they are becoming compounded. And certainly there seems to be an operation to highlight Rishi Sunak, to change his image, to change it from one in which he was viewed as the People's Chancellor to something very different, to someone who is more out of touch, to someone who less understands the struggles of working people in this country. And of course, this coincided with the Labour Party sending round a briefing note to all journalists in Parliament yesterday, highlighting what they describe are 15 separate tax rises under this Chancellor. Now, some of these tax rises that Labour claim are arguable as to whether they're tax rises or tweaks or changes or threshold freezes or whatever. But ultimately, it is true that this Chancellor has raised taxes across the whole country, the whole tax burden, the highest since the days of Clement Attlee, and that is unavoidable.
Yeah, I mean, Scarlett, there is a legal loophole here. You're perfectly allowed by law to do what she's done. If she has indeed done it, I think we have to assume she has. But it really does smack of, well, beyond hypocrisy to say, I'm non-domicile, I don't live here. And she's living in 11 Downing Street.
I know. I mean, I would like to say that I'm not sure it's the Labour smear unit so much as the Boris Johnson smear unit. I mean, that's where the real dislike is. Of course, what she's done is completely legal and utterly greedy. I mean, it just shows, you know, I make at least 11 million a year from this thing, and I don't want to pay British taxes on it. But on the other hand, you know, we are going to put up tax rates for the working people. We're going to lower, you know, take off the £20 for the benefits. We're going to do all of that. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And of course, it is completely, it had already been changing. Rishi was on his way down. I mean, he didn't really need this, but it's not helping. I mean, he is no longer a contender. And he is very, very unpopular because people don't trust him anymore. We know there are tax rises because we're paying them. I mean, there's no point in him telling me I'm a tax-cutting chancellor and I'm going to cut in 2 years' time, just before an election. I mean, we're not stupid. We do understand cynicism.
But it seems to me that they are the Teflon Tories, aren't they? Because when it comes to these sort of peccadillos and scandals that keep emerging, you had Robert Jenrick and his potentially dodgy dealings with developers, the Patterson scandal for crying out loud, Partygate, and now this. But it does keep playing into the idea of these are people with a lot of privilege who just don't seem to get the real world.
And I think I would take issue with your analysis that this is a Teflon government. We've seen the polls be really quite volatile. Of course, a big drop starting at that Owen Paterson scandal, going through into Partygate, a slight recovery after Christmas, and then crashing down with that police investigation and Sue Gray's half report. A recovery last week in the polls, however, closing that gap on most major pollsters with Labour to just 1 or 2 points. But in the last few days, that gap seems to have widened again. This is another scandal that clearly will play heavily on the minds of voters, and we can start to see that in the polls. That's not to say that the polls are set forever. A week is a long time in politics, and we've seen these polls bounce up and down and bounce up and down, and we know that this in some ways has been a government that has been deeply unlucky, whether it's a global pandemic or the first big war in Europe for a very long time. But to some extent, this has been a Prime Minister and a Chancellor, perhaps, who have been relatively lucky in terms of the imagery, the way that they can get across a message. Yes, taxes are rising, but of course there has been the biggest pandemic that anyone's seen in a century. Yes, people are feeling the pinch, but of course we know that the energy crisis has been massively exacerbated in all countries across the Western world by the crisis in Ukraine. There are significant issues, of course, that people are facing, but the government has a lot of answers to those issues. Not answers in terms of helping people, but answers in terms of explaining how we got here.
But people they really don't believe it. I mean, if you're looking at the focus groups that have been done in the last 2 weeks, the trust has gone. And I know that the top Tories say Partygate's over, we've got to think about Ukraine. Frankly, as far as most people are concerned, Ukraine is over there, and what happened is still one rule for them and another for us, and it hasn't gone away. And once you lose trust, as we all know, building it back is nearly impossible.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Tom, thanks for joining us on this one. Well, we're going to be joining Jens Stoltenberg, who's the Secretary General of NATO, anytime soon. But considering he works in the military, he doesn't always follow military timings. So let's go back to our top story now. And the government has announced its bright, new, shiny energy plans that, well, feel all a bit familiar. Boris is going with nuclear, with plans for 8 new power plants. The plans will involve building 2 proposed reactors at Sizewell C in Suffolk. Our East of England reporter Amelia Harper has been to the existing Sizewell B power station to examine the arguments for and against nuclear energy.
Operating since 1955, Sizewell B supplies 3% of the UK's electricity, or enough to power 2.5 million homes in East Anglia. It's one of 8 nuclear power stations in the UK. Most of the existing reactors are due to reach the end of their lives and shut down before 2030, but more are being built.
This is the home of nuclear energy. We first split the atom in the UK. We had the first civilian nuclear power plant. We're bringing nuclear home with one nuclear plant and one nuclear reactor every year for 8 years rather than one a decade.
French energy company EDF is currently building Hinkley Point C power station in Somerset. It also plans to build another plant, Sizewell C, next to Sizewell B in Suffolk. It's been backed by £100 million of government funding. Robert Gunn is the station director at Sizewell B Power Station.
So at the moment, nuclear is just about 20% of the country's electricity, 24/7, 365 days of the year. But if you look forward, when we get the new power stations on, Hinkley C, Sizewell C, and here at Sizewell B can provide power for over 15 million homes, a fantastic amount of energy for the country.
But not everyone is convinced about the future for nuclear, including local campaigner Alison Downs.
There are numerous future energy scenarios that do not include Sizewell C, and clearly solar, onshore wind, offshore wind, all of those can roll out faster and more cheaply than nuclear power. Our energy crisis is now, and we shouldn't be putting so much money into a technology that won't deliver for at least 15 years, by which time our energy landscape can be transformed by storage and energy efficiency. The Sizewell C project is risky, expensive and incredibly slow to build, and everyone in the country should be concerned about it because they will all have to help pay for it, not just the people who live here.
Projects on the scale of Sizewell C take about a decade to go from concept to reality.
We've worked really hard with the local community to take on feedback, and that's actually helped us to shape the proposal, and based on that feedback there has been quite a number of large changes made to make the project as seamless as possible for the local community. On the other side of that though, there will literally be thousands, if not tens of thousands of jobs being created and tens of millions of pounds being pumped into the local community and indeed hundreds of millions into the UK economy.
Amid a cost of living crisis, the government is looking to other low-carbon energy sources. Nuclear is high on the agenda, but the build timescales mean it won't start making a difference for many years to come. Amelia Harper, GB News, Suffolk.
Well, you've been sending your emails in throughout the show today about the proposals for energy. Kelvin says, although nuclear power is now supposed to be safe and clean, does it not have radioactive waste? And I'd like to know if we know how to dispose of its waste safely. It's a very good point, something actually that Scarlett raised much earlier. Michael says, France is doing well with nuclear energy. We should have done more a long time ago. Oh yeah, you got that right, Michael. It is not too late to catch up, but please don't put the brakes on. Another great strategy for Britain. Couldn't agree more. Joan says, I agree that new houses and buildings should have solar panels and insulation, but it's not that easy or cheap to insulate older properties. Labour and Conservatives are equally to blame. We need to ensure energy security and food security, plus stop using farming land for solar panels. Well, that'd take some sort of joined-up thinking between governments, wouldn't it? And I can't see that happening. Derek says, Scotland has lots of cheap and clean energy. I'm talking about electricity and hydrogen. I believe nuclear energy is dirty, filthy and toxic. Don't mince your words. It is bad for our future generations of children. Well, let's go back to former Labour media advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire on this and a lot more. Anything from those points coming in from the audience that you want to pick up on, riff on?
I was thinking about Scotland, actually. So a friend of mine who used to be an MP for the Western Isles, it took him 10 years to get the first wind turbine onto Harris. And I went there sometime later. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's at a crossroads. There are now 9 of them. And actually, nobody's helping him. And somewhere like Harris, which is, a wonderful island, but it does have bits in the middle that are not particularly pretty, you could have masses and masses. And actually, that's what we should be doing. And it just seemed, why take one man 10 years and it's a community effort? So actually, all the profit goes into charities on Harris, which are much needed. And there seems to be no creative. Everybody's saying, how can we make money out of this? There's lobbying, there's everything. And we really could have done it, and we've just wasted. I mean, you talk about the waste of time on nuclear. The waste of time on renewables is just incredible, let alone the insulating, where actually insulating, of course, is the best because it's energy we're not even going to use.
Yeah, no, do you know, I couldn't agree more. As much as I hate those protesters who glue themselves to things, they drive me stark raving mad. But one thing that strikes me is, you know, there's been a lot of talk about home ownership and people insulating their homes and putting lagging in their lofts and so on and so forth. But we're increasingly becoming, especially for younger generations, a nation of renters. Yeah. And if you rent a property, no landlord in this country is bothered about how big your energy bills are because they're not paying it. So surely the government do have to intervene on this.
Well, I mean, I certainly know that they had money put aside for Liverpool. I mean, they were doing some pilot projects on insulating. But the minute you looked at how much money there was and how many houses, it was very little. Because, I mean, I absolutely agree with renting, what you say about renting. I mean, what landlords are not going to invest because they don't pay the energy bills. But actually, I mean, it is a country. I mean, we've got to understand that it's for all of us, and as a country we've got to do something. And actually building nuclear things for 10 years ahead is not going to deal with our energy crisis at the moment.
Yeah, and well, I mean, the problem is, of course, when we look at Boris Johnson's track record since the start of his tenure in number 10, he says one thing one week and he changes his mind the next, doesn't he? And you can't help but worry that when it suits him, he puts out the right headlines at the right time, there's a little spike, and as soon as someone in public opinion changes their mind and he licks his finger, puts it up to the wind and thinks, oh, I don't know, direction of travel might be changing on this, the policy's gone.
Yeah, but it's more than that. I mean, he promised us 40 new hospitals, right? And then one found out, well, they weren't 40 new hospitals. They were 40 hospitals that he might be doing some work on, and nothing's happened. I mean, it's more that he doesn't even change his mind. He just doesn't believe in delivery. I mean, some people say, you know, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Boris Johnson governs in headlines, and that's it.
Well, they've been in campaigning strategy forever, haven't they? Scarlett, it's been wonderful having you here today. Really enjoyed your company and your insights, so do come back and join me once again. Well, that's about it for now. We were, of course, waiting for Jens Stoltenberg. He could pop up at any moment, so stay tuned for him. We want to know what NATO are going to do about Ukraine. But you can join me again tomorrow for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. But first, let's have a little look at the weather. Let's hope it's getting better.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A windy day for all of us, those winds bringing wintry showers to many parts, but there will be some brighter spells, especially for southern counties. This low pressure is moving away, but around that low we've got tightly packed isobars and a strong wind blowing from the north to northwest. That's bringing cold air in, hence the wintry showers, a mixture of rain, sleet, hail and snow in places. And the winds will be gusting 40 to 50 miles an hour, and those strongest winds will be transferring east across the country, so turning up across east and southeast England a bit later on. The far south stays mostly dry with some sunshine, 12 or 13 Celsius here. Otherwise, further north, it's 8 or 9 degrees, and the lively showers falling as a mixture of rain, sleet, hail and snow over hills. Many of the showers disappear through the night. The winds fall a bit lighter. We'll see clear spells, but further showers into Scotland and Northern Ireland, again falling and settling as snow over the hills. It's going to be a frosty night with temperatures dipping below zero in the countryside. In the far south, however, it stays frost-free. Cloud turns up here. A few spots of rain into the far south and southwest. Mainly the heavier rain stays out in the Channel and affects the Channel Islands, but coastal parts will see a damp start. That rain eventually pulls away. And then for many, it's another sunny spells and showers sort of day. Again, a mixture of hails and sleet at lower levels, snow over hills, and it will stay cold with temperatures of 12 Celsius in the south, 7 or 8 further north. The brisk wind continues, but not quite as blustery as Thursday. Into Friday night, once again, the winds fall a bit lighter. Clear spells will allow a frost to form, and so it's a chilly start to the weekend. But Saturday, for many, looks dry and bright. With lighter winds and more sunshine, it will be a more pleasant day.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating